and welcome to Casual Buddhism. I'm your host, Cindy Rasicot, author of This Fresh Existence, Heart Teachings from Bhikkhuni Dhammananda. Many of you who have attended Casual Buddhism in the past know that I feature conversations with Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni, who is the very first female monastic ordained in the Theravada Buddhist tradition in Thailand. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the future direction of Casual Buddhism before I get started with today's guest. And in the next 6 months, I'm going to be shifting the focus of our conversations from Venerable Dhammananda to begin to explore conversations with Buddhist women from all over the world. I'm very excited in June to be attending Sakyadhita, the international organization. It's a conference for Buddhist women from all over the world. I'll be meeting and interacting with Buddhist women from all different countries and cultures. In addition, if you'd like to sign up for Sakyadhita, the conference is in East Malaysia, and you're welcome to sign up. There's plenty of time. There's plenty of spaces still available. So just to let you know, the future direction of Casual Buddhism will be shifting a bit. And in the months of July through October, I'll be featuring new conversations with different women. So for today, I'm going to be introducing Venerable Losang Gendun. He's a Tibetan monk from the Netherlands, and I'll get started in just a moment. Thank you so much for watching Casual Buddhism. I really appreciate your support. And if you have any questions or want to interact with me directly, please feel free to contact me. My website is cindyrasicot.com. Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you
Sadhu, sadhu.
for being here. I'm going to give a short introduction of you. I'm going to be, with your permission, presenting this on Casual Buddhism. Just to say something, I attended a retreat with you in December in the Netherlands, and one of the participants said, you know, it would be so interesting if you would interview Venerable and ask him about his background, because your background is so rich and so interesting. So that's how the genesis of this talk came to be. I guess you've been practicing for nearly 4 decades. And
Yes.
the past 15 years, you've been a dedicated teacher, of which I have had the privilege of partaking in, Buddhist philosophy, psychology, and meditation. And I'm not going to go into too much. You're so involved in so many things. And my hope is that beyond your Buddhist affiliations, you serve as an interreligious canon at the Peace Cathedral in Tbilisi, Georgia. And in 2023, you founded the Buddha Project, which is so fascinating, and we'll talk about today. So I'm going to sort of just begin, and I think some of your background will come out in the questions. What experience, you had experiences, I believe, working in palliative care technology and with refugee organizations before you became a Buddhist. If I remember correctly, and I could have mistaken this, were you a member of a punk rock band?
Oh, yes, even that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so include any or all of the above that you would like to discuss.
Oh, wow. That's almost so long ago that I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then let me connect
Well,
the experience here.
yeah.
What remains in your memory of those experiences do you bring into your Buddhist practice, if anything?
I think a lot. I mean, I always held, and I still do, that before becoming a bhikshu, as it is called, a mendicant, it is important to live life. Buddha Shakyamuni actually did that before he became enlightened himself, before he set out on a path. And yeah, I had a rich and rewarding lay life. That was what one could say. I played in a punk band. But when I look back at it, I guess, and that is from a Buddhist perspective, good imprints. I always sought meaning. Meaning above, money or self-importance or whatever, you know. I needed a reason to get up in the morning. I thought that was the most important thing to do. Moreover, my parents passed away very early, which gives like quite a sense of urgency, of not to wait. the since we can become quite lethargic almost, like, the good thing will happen later. And I was sort of always a bit fearful of leaving things to tomorrow, because I was aware, due to my own parents, that tomorrow might never come. You might be healthy one day and the next day you have cancer and you're on the way to your grave, as was the case for my mother. And so on the one hand, I was never rebellious to be rebellious, but that was just a moment in my life to my little punk phase was a moment, I think, as teenagers do, to find to find some freedom of the confines that you find yourself in. And my youth was not an easy one. I think that was like a good transitional phase. You get to kick against all things, and then resettle. Like, okay, so what are my values? And it's also the time that I found or encountered Buddhism in the Theravada tradition, the Thai Theravada tradition. And yeah, I started to work initially in palliative care, as I had done so for I had done so for my own mother. So I had some skills by nature, one could say. And so I just put them to work, and then I moved on to refugee organizations where I felt extremely comfortable, and that's what I did most of my professional life. And then later on, I got into technology and management at the beginning of the technology revolution in the 1990s. Yeah.
And how so I know you practice in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. How did you make the transition at that point? Why did you decide to, I believe you ordained in the Theravada tradition. How
No,
did you make that decision?
no, I ordained in the Tibetan tradition, actually.
Sorry.
And to be honest, I never saw it as a transition. I grew up as a good Catholic kid. And my father was from the 1920s. I always say I grew up in a world that already no longer existed when I grew up in it. My father kept sort of like a pre-Second World War environment in our house, which was an interesting thing to grow up in. And to be honest, I always experienced as a great advantage in my life. But even as a practicing Christian in my teens, I found this whole idea of all these sects, all this endless infighting over such a noble idea to make no sense whatsoever. Now, if we should turn the other cheek, why are Christians so hard fighting each other? And I did not want to take that into my experience of the Dharma. As His Holiness's famous book is called, One Teacher, Many Traditions. And one story that I often tell actually comes from an abbot of a Christian monastery, Benedictine monastery in France. At one point, he no longer lives, but at one point I spoke to him, and he had actually studied classical Aramaic and Hebrew and Greek to retranslate the Old Testament or the New Testament into French. And at one point, I asked him about the fact that the New Testament, in fact, contains so many different voices. These stories sometimes don't match up. And then he said something quite interesting. He says, actually, that is what gives me faith. Because that is exactly what you would get if four different people talk to the same person. If you ask them back later on, like, what did you learn from that meeting? You will get four stories. And obviously, we are 2,500 years beyond the Buddha's passing. And I think it is valuable to recognize that the core of all Buddhist traditions is surprisingly similar, actually, 2,500 years later. Now, when it comes to the Four Noble Truths and non-self and the 12 links and so many topics we are in complete agreement on. Now, I think as our academia have an inclination to overemphasize the differences in details, making things sound very complex. But on the ground, whether or not you practice in a Tibetan community on shamatha or renunciation or so on, or in Theravada community, the differences are minor. The experience is very, very similar. And so in that sense, I never transitioned. I just, at one point, I encountered the Tibetan tradition, again, by good karma.
Mhm.
and I found it to contain ideas and methods that suited me as a human. And especially the Tibetan tradition very strongly emphasizes great compassion. And for me, that was it definitely exists similarly in the Theravada tradition, but it's less emphasized.
Yes.
And that strong emphasis of it, I found to be very compelling.
Mm.
You know, it fitted my career, my inclination as a layperson,
Right.
and plus it makes use of a lot of human creativity. You know, the tantric tradition is very flowery, but also uses visualizations and the whole scala of what it means to be a human being. So that broadness, that using all of our human emotion and creativity for meditative goals, again, I find very compelling and very helpful. And so for me, it was more like a continuity.
Yes.
And I still practice also Theravada methods. I mean, I trained especially in the Upandita tradition,
Mhm, mhm.
and that is still the ground on which I stand. So I'm not a Theravada or Tibetan practitioner. I see myself as a son of the Buddha, to use that word, and
Oh, that's
I
wonderful.
think that's
That's
quite
very good.
enough.
That's very good. And in the, I'm going to jump to the Buddha project because I'm wondering if that same thinking is at play there. What is the vision and the mission of the project, and what are you working on?
To be honest, it actually started as a joke. Uh, that um, that it is easy in all spiritual practice to mistake intellectual understanding for deep experience. And at one point I joked, you know, if intellectual understanding was sufficient, then the center in which I was teaching would be a Buddha factory, because then you would sit down and I would teach you the Dharma, and then 2.5 hours later you would all leave enlightened, and then I would take the next group and I would become a rich man myself. Um, and so it started off in a way as a joking term, uh, but then, in my relationship with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of the great teachers of the Tibetan tradition, in whose organization I trained as a monastic, amongst other things, and did my studies, he at one point warned, in a very classical Buddhist fashion, that if we don't gain realizations, direct insight of the Dharma will be nothing but an academic interest. It will disappear. One point we will have the text, and we will not know what the text really referred to. And I think that is truly a struggle in the West. Now, we
Yes.
we talk about these texts endlessly, but there's very few that actually really know from inside out what the text refer to. And so I wanted to create an environment as a service to this organization, to which I owe so much, that has this as its emphasis. Like, can I build an environment for Westerners to be supported and to find all the services and resources as a Westerner to develop well in the Buddhist tradition, to get a taste of the Dharma, the Dhamma in Pali. And on the one hand, that is directed towards Buddhist practitioners, but also I wanted to be it a contribution to the larger sense that, to say it in the words of Socrates, as it does on my own website, that the unexamined life is not worth living. In other words, to put Buddhist practice in a larger context of contemplative life, whether or not that is religious or non-religious, um, that true value. Uh, That, well, to say it in this way, I think our sense of well-being especially comes from a sense of value and meaning in our lives. No, pleasure is ephemeral. It comes and goes. No, you can put something sweet in your mouth and 10 seconds later it's gone. You are hungry, so your food tastes well, but then 10 minutes later you're satisfied and that feeling is gone. But to the extent that we experience ourselves as having meaning, purpose, value to someone else, that is a sustainable sense of well-being. And that can only come from introspective, contemplative lifestyle, where you ask who you are in relation to the world around you. Moreover, to use the great philosopher Hannah Arendt, it is also through questioning oneself that also one becomes a person. And I think that is especially crucial in our own time. As she highlights that many of the Nazis did horrible things because they refused to question themselves if what they were doing was ethically acceptable or not. And so it's like we are such great liars to ourselves. But if you're a contemplative, you can't lie. You ask yourself the important questions. And then, you have to go naked in front of yourself and to say, like, and then now, who are you? Is this what I wanted to become?
Is,
And yeah,
excuse me, I just have one question because you mentioned
is
offering this for Westerners. The words that came to me are lived experience. And it comes from something you were saying earlier. Is there a sense of not only being contemplative, but drawing from one's own experience? Is there a link in that somewhere?
yeah, of course there is. I mean, and that actually comes back to some extent to what we talked about earlier. I never believed that Theravada or Mahayana. I don't believe in this the way we understand traditions. We understand tradition in a very sectarian way, but it
Mm,
was never meant that way in the Buddhist context. We
mm,
have lineages of experience. I trained with two extremely experienced teachers, amongst others. I mean, I trained with many, but to take the center stage in my life. And you train with them until they are satisfied that you have a measure of experience of what they wanted to transmit. And then it's up to you to pass that on to someone else. It's always all our skills are obtained interpersonally, aren't they? Now, if you
yeah.
want to become a great painter, you find yourself a great painter. You study with that painter to know how it is done. You can't learn such things from a book, especially not the Dharma. And so, indeed, I wanted to create an environment in which we talk about the experience of it rather than the theory of it. Because we have both within different Buddhist organizations, but also in the academia, we have excellent studies of the Dharma. You want to learn Pali or Tibetan or Chinese or, every type of Buddhist philosophy. This is all accessible.
Mhm.
But we don't talk enough about how then to integrate that, how to transform that intellectual understanding into a seeing of the way things truly are when you unveil them from all the layers that we put on top of things.
Wow, that's very profound. Thank you. I'm gonna just need to digest that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But another aspect maybe that here to highlight, I think, and that is very important as well. And one of the things that it also aims to do is to create a safe environment in which people can progress. Spiritual practice is like, it's driving like a Formula One car. If you don't know how to drive it, you might run it into a wall. Then it's a different thing, a dangerous thing.
I'm sorry, that was a really funny image.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the same way, the methods that we use question everything, but it must be done in a wholesome way, because it can also lead to mental problems if you don't take care. And I
Yes.
think that's also an aspect. And yeah,
Is it, and may I go back to something you said in the very beginning about your father who had he had a set of personal values, I think that was very strong. In that sense, did you learn something about the importance of values and meaning from him?
and for sure, the advantage of a good pre-Second World War Catholic upbringing was that it was an intact religious environment. And I don't mean religion in the negative sense that it has nowadays, but in a distinct worldview where you perceive your own little life in a much larger context. Now, I left that tradition, but that sense of the depth of spiritual practice, how it presents to you a very different outlook on you and your whole life as a whole, where you are provided with a self-transcendent perspective on your life that is invaluable.
Mhm.
We all live in the stories of others, as what is his name again? The great feminist philosopher Judith Butler states, now we live in an ocean of stories. And we believe our stories to be authentic, but obviously they're not, and that's in that way. No, we just take the stories from the context that we are living in. And now our current stories are self-obsessed. It's all about me. And they're self-defeating stories in that sense. And so I'm very glad that I grew up in a worldview still that lacked this self-obsession. No, it was a worldview that prioritized an overall vision of the plan that God had for his creation. And then you are then part of that plan somehow. And that provides you with a whole different sense of who am I than this navel staring sense of authentic self that we have nowadays.
Absolutely. And I'm going to link the last question with the feminist topic that you mentioned. You are a strong supporter of women's ordination and gender equity in Buddhism. When did you become interested in this issue? And is there a female monastic that you're particularly inspired by?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a feminist because of my mother. The strong person in my childhood was my mother. At the same time, this was also a woman, and I think that is very recognizable for many women, uh, that did not grow up in a time where the tools were present for her to find freedom. So she wanted, but she couldn't.
Mm.
And so to have been a partner in the life of a woman so intelligent, so brilliant, and so handicapped by her time period, made me very vocal on this topic, as I owe so much to her, especially my sense of spirituality. She was an amazing spiritual practitioner, especially in the latter part of her life. But moreover, I found that I had extraordinary both male and female teachers. But in terms of the one that really shifted my meditative experience, that was actually a woman, Salaya Badamanika, the teacher of the Upandita Center in Lumbini. I trained with her for 3 months, and that was only 3 months, but that was eye-opening. A profoundly compassionate, safe person, but also with an enormous foot kicking people into nirvana. And that combination, I thought that's priceless, because to find a teacher that both has these qualities and has the courage to do what needs to be done, even if you don't like them for it, that's quite something. That's truly. We talked earlier about self-transcendence. And so she did not need to be liked by me. What was important was my well-being, and she would do everything to make that happen. And that immediately instilled in me such a confidence. And then you can train, because then you can let go. Then there's only the practice. There's no one. No, you don't need anyone that is practicing anymore. You can let the mind find its own way to freedom. And so I've been a beneficiary actually of a number of different female Buddhist teachers. But there's also something else, and that is the Buddha is extraordinary in his courage that he created, as far as I know, the first organization for women, led by women, in a very patriarchal environment. Now we often focus on his limitations, but he had to live with his own culture. But that he created an organization in which women could freely pursue their freedom is something amazing. And he highlights that men and women are similar in their capacity, or the same in their capacity, to achieve nirvana, nibbana. And I think on the one hand, as an honor, as an homage to our teacher, on the other hand, for the well-being of the continuing existence of the Dharma in this world, it is imperative that we keep fighting for the equity of women in Buddhism, because the essence of Buddhism is that all things are empty. are empty of independent or independent alienated existence. Habit, that means the moment we create the bias of an inherent difference between men and women, we belie the Dharma itself. So with one hand, we say we seek freedom, and on the other hand, we say this is not possible because women are inherently inferior. But if I say that women are inherently inferior, I also say that I inherently exist.
Yes.
And so if I exist in an independent way, then I can never overcome my problems because then I am like this. But I'm not like this. I'm a fully interdependent existing phenomena. So if I change my causes and conditions, I can find freedom. That's the same for women. And so you cannot say people can find freedom and at the same time say, well, but this is less or so for women. That does not go together. So you must choose. And so if you truly believe the word of the Buddha, then you must hold that men and women are equal in their opportunity or in their possibility to find freedom and to provide them with the opportunity to do so. Otherwise, the Dharma will disappear. So I think, our sectarianism and our bias towards women are the greatest obstacles for the continued existence of the Dharma in this world. And I think that is the most precious thing, because without the Dharma, we can't find freedom. We are bound by our ignorance, our hatred, our utilization of each other and our natural environment. Then there is no escape.
Mm. Wow. Thank you so much. I'm always so appreciative of your wisdom. Thank you for speaking with me today, and I wish you all good things. Thank you.
Thank you for this conversation, and please give my regards to your teacher,
Yes.
Vandana. It's always, I think, important to highlight for the listeners to this conversation to check upon her website to
Yes.
see the amazing work that she's doing, because it's inspiring for women that there are great trailblazers out there. It's courageous what she does, and
Yes, I will
may we all
mention.
find the same courage.
I mentioned her website. Thank you. Sangdhamma Kalyani, Song, SONGDHAMMAKALYANI.com.
Yes.
I think I got that right.
And if people want to find the Buddha Project, it's the buddhaproject.org.
Yes.
That's
Thank you.
very simple.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us today. Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.